China is making enormous progress in the development of artificial intelligence technology, and it has set off an earthquake in the West. The stocks of US big tech corporations crashed, losing tens of billions of dollars on the news that a small Chinese company called Deepseek had created a new AI model that they released for free to the public. The Western media has referred to Deepseek as the biggest threat to Silicon Valley's hegemony, and this is widely being called a Sputnik moment. That is a reference back to 1957 during the First Cold War, when the Soviet Union launched the first ever satellite in outer space, which was called Sputnik 1. The United States had significantly underestimated the technological capabilities of the former Soviet Union then, just as the US has vastly underestimated the technological capabilities of China today. Now, what's amazing is that the small Chinese company Deepseek was able to develop a large language model, LLM, that is even better than the models that have been developed by the US megacorporation OpenAI, which is half owned by Microsoft, one of the biggest corporate monopolies on Earth. And in order to develop its groundbreaking R1 model, Deepseek reportedly only spent around $6 million on the research. This is absolutely remarkable because US big tech corporations have spent more than $1 trillion developing artificial intelligence in the past decade. Just in 2024, US big tech corporations spent $200 billion on capital expenditure for AI, and they're expected to spend $234 billion in 2025. Moreover, when OpenAI announced in December 2024 that it had introduced ChatGPT Pro, it was charging $200 per month just for a subscription to use the application. Compare that to the Deepseek R1 model, which is completely open source. It's free for everyone in the world to use. Not only is their app free to use, but you can download the source code because it's open source. You can install it locally on your computer or on your phone. You can even use it without the internet. This is completely free for everyone on Earth. And what's even better is that Deepseek's LLM models only use a tiny fraction of the overall energy and computing power needed by OpenAI's models. So this is cheaper to use, it's better for the environment, and it's more accessible to the entire world. And it's free. I need to stress this point. It's free. This is why the week it was launched in late January, Deepseek became the most popular app on Earth, the #1 app in the United States, overtaking ChatGPT. This has caused pandemonium in the US stock market because Deepseek only spent reportedly around $6 million compared to the hundreds of billions of dollars being spent by US big tech corporations. So a lot of investors are saying, why are we spending so much money on these companies when a small startup in China can do better work for free? And moreover, the US government put export restrictions on China, trying to block China from getting access to cutting edge NVIDIA chips that are needed for AI, or that they thought were needed to develop AI. But in reality, Deepseek has shown that you don't need the most cutting edge chips if you have brilliant researchers who are motivated to innovate. So what happened? NVIDIA lost $600 billion in its market cap in one day. This was the largest one-day loss in the history of the US stock market. NVIDIA shares plunged 17%, and other shares of big tech companies like Dell and Oracle and Supermicro Computer all fell by at least 8.7% in one day. Now, immediately after NVIDIA's stock crashed, it slightly rose again because investors were doing something known as buying the dip. The same thing happened overall to the NASDAQ Composite, which is the main stock market index of publicly traded tech companies in the United States. But this was a massive blow to global investor confidence in the US stock market, and the idea being pushed by the Western financial press of so-called American exceptionalism. The idea that US tech companies are the best in the world and there's no real competition to these monopolies in Silicon Valley. In reality, what we've seen is that out of nowhere, a small, little-known Chinese startup has shaken everything up. And this is leading many financial analysts to ask if this is the beginning of the popping of the massive big tech bubble in the United States. Now, I recently published a video, which I will put a link to in the description below, explaining how the US stock market is in the biggest bubble in history. When you look at the Buffett indicator, which measures the market capitalization of publicly traded stocks in the US compared to GDP, you can see that it is at the highest level ever recorded at more than 200% of GDP, which is significantly higher than at the peak of the dot-com bubble that burst in 2000. Or if you look at the price to earnings ratio, the PE ratio, which compares the inflation-adjusted earnings of US publicly traded companies compared to the price of their stocks, you can see that they're at the highest levels since the dot-com bubble of 2000, and they're even higher than they were in 1929 at the peak of the stock market mania, which eventually crashed and contributed to the Great Depression of the 1930s. This is why even Jamie Dimon, the CEO of the largest US bank, JP Morgan Chase, warned at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January that the US stock market is inflated. He publicly said it. And when you have these large oligarchs on Wall Street publicly saying it, it's clear that it's a warning. They're saying, you should probably get out now. And what's even more concerning is how extremely concentrated the US stock market is. The majority of the growth in the S&P 500, which is the index of the 500 largest publicly traded companies on US stock exchanges, the growth in that index in recent years has been overwhelmingly dominated by just a small handful of big tech corporations, which are known as the Magnificent Seven or the Mag 7. Those are Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Meta, Tesla, and Alphabet. Together, those 7 big tech corporations make up a third of the weight of the entire S&P 500. And those same Mag 7 companies make up nearly a quarter of the weight of the MSCI World Index, which is used by investors around the world to invest in the stock market of the entire world. And yet it's largely dominated by a small handful of US big tech monopolies. So there are literally trillions of dollars from investors all around the world that have flooded into the stocks of these US big tech corporations under the assumption that they have no real competition. They're the only game in town. And yet what we've seen in China is that these small startup companies with just a few $1 million can challenge the technological chokehold that Silicon Valley has on the entire world. This is especially symbolic because the extreme power of the billionaire oligarchs in the US big tech companies has been exposed by the Donald Trump administration. Trump invited the world's richest billionaires to sit with his cabinet members at his inauguration on the 20th of January. The world's 3 richest oligarchs were sitting there, which are Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg, which together, the 3 of them have more than $800 billion of wealth. They were joined by the CEO of Alphabet and Google, the billionaire Sundar Pichai, and also the billionaire CEO of Apple, Tim Cook. And then just one day after Trump invited all of those big tech billionaires to his inauguration, he invited 3 more big tech billionaires to the White House, where they announced the Stargate project, pledging $500 billion of investment in artificial intelligence technology in the US. Trump proudly announced this standing next to Sam Altman, who is the billionaire CEO of OpenAI, which is half owned by Microsoft. He was also with the billionaire CEO of SoftBank, Masayoshi Son, and he was with the billionaire, one of the richest men on earth, Larry Ellison, who is the chairman of Oracle. So it's become completely clear to the entire world that the United States is an oligarchy, that the US government is being run by a small handful of billionaires. In the Trump administration, there are 13 billionaires, including Trump himself, who have senior roles in the administration. When Trump ran for president, he held these luxurious galas where he raised tens of millions of dollars, telling rich people that he's going to continue cutting taxes on the rich and on corporations. And when Trump was president the first time, he cut taxes on the rich so much that the 400 richest billionaire families in the United States paid a lower average tax rate than the bottom half of the entire country, the bottom half of working class Americans who struggle to make ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck. They pay more taxes than the richest billionaire oligarchs in the country. So obviously, these big tech corporations are extremely afraid of competition. That's what they fear most of all. Well, regulation and being broken up, but that's not going to happen because the US government has been captured by them. So what they fear is competition, especially from China, which is why the US government has tried to ban all of the Chinese competitors to US big tech monopolies. This is what they tried to do to TikTok, trying to force the Chinese parent company of TikTok, which is called ByteDance, to sell TikTok to a US big tech monopoly. And now the US government is fear-mongering about Deepseek, claiming that the app is a so-called national security threat, which is always the excuse used by the US government. They said that Chinese electric vehicles from companies like BYD are a so-called national security threat. So the US government put 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles just a few weeks after Elon Musk, the richest man on earth, warned that if the US government didn't put protectionist policies and tariffs on Chinese EVs, that they would demolish rivals like Tesla. So, and this was under the Biden administration. This is bipartisan. It's not just Donald Trump. They are trying to protect US big tech monopolies and prevent any Chinese competitors from challenging them, despite the fact that Chinese electric vehicles are significantly cheaper and better than Tesla and other electric vehicles produced by US car companies, which there are not many options. But look, I have personally been in BYD cars and in Tesla cars. BYD cars are better, frankly, and they're way cheaper. You can buy low-level BYD cars for around $10,000 US. Teslas are 4 or 5 times as much money for worse quality, but the US government doesn't want people in the US to have these Chinese vehicles because they're trying to protect US corporate monopolies. And what is their excuse? National security. It's always their excuse. In fact, the US Navy has already banned the use of Deepseek, claiming that it has security and ethical concerns. When they say ethical concerns, they mean it's unethical because it's competing with US corporate monopolies. And I need to stress again, this is so stupid because Deepseek's model, its R1 model, is open source. It's free. You don't need to use the Deepseek app. You can install it on your phone. The actual LLM, the large language model. You can install it on your computer locally. You don't even need the internet to access it. And what's funny is that some AI developers on Twitter were making fun of OpenAI, which its name is OpenAI, although it's actually half owned by Microsoft, one of the world's largest corporate monopolies. And this Chinese company, Deepseek, actually produced an open source model. And yet OpenAI, one of the largest corporations on earth, is charging people $200 US per month to use its ChatGPT Pro model. And meanwhile, critics of Deepseek say, oh, this Chinese company is going to collect all of your data. Meanwhile, if you actually look at OpenAI's privacy policy, they say very, very clearly, I'm reading here from OpenAI's website, quote, "We collect personal data if you create an account to use our services or communicate with us," end quote. So everything that the US government claims about Chinese companies is exactly what all of these US big tech corporations do. They're spying on all people all around the world, not just in the US, not only domestic users, people all around the world who use these US big tech apps, they're being spied on. Their data is going to the United States And we know that the US National Security Agency, the NSA, spies on everyone all around the world, including heads of state. This was exposed by the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden over a decade ago. He showed that more than 35 world leaders were being spied on by the NSA, by the US government, using backdoors in different technological products produced by US companies. All of these US companies allow the US government to spy on people around the world. And yet we're supposed to be afraid of China. Every accusation made by the US against China is a confession of what the US government actually does. And speaking of that, I should point out just how coincidental it is, gosh darn, that the same week that Deepseek became the most popular, the most downloaded app in the United States, overtaking its Silicon Valley competitors, what happened? There was a massive cyber attack against Deepseek. What a coincidence. I wonder who could possibly be behind these attacks. I'm sure there are no connections whatsoever, but I'm just going to point out, apropos of nothing, two very interesting news articles from back in 2019. Did you know that the US government admitted to launching cyber attacks on Iran? Who knew? Or did you also know that back in 2019, the New York Times reported that the US government officials admitted that they were carrying out cyber attacks on Russia's power grid? So there is a precedent here. That's very strange. What we've seen for years is that the US government has been waging a technology war and an economic war against China. And Western media outlets have said this openly. Back in 2023, CNN published an article titled, US Escalates Tech Battle by Cutting China Off from AI Chips. And this was not just the Biden administration. This went back to 2018 in Trump's first term, when Trump launched a trade war on China and he began restricting the export of important forms of technology to China. This has been referred to as a chip war. And why is the US government waging a chip war? Why did the US government put sanctions on top Chinese tech companies like Huawei? Why did the US government put export restrictions on China to try to prevent it from getting access to cutting-edge semiconductors? Well, Joe Biden's Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo, admitted it. She said that the US wants to, quote, slow down China's rate of innovation, end quote. That was openly admitted. The US government's stated goal is to prevent China from technologically developing. In 2024, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said that the US will, quote, do whatever it takes, end quote, to prevent China from getting access to cutting-edge technology. Do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes includes a lot. That includes cyber attacks, sanctions, tariffs, sabotage. Who knows? It includes a lot of things within whatever it takes. This is how desperate the US government has been in its tech war and trade war on China, trying to save Silicon Valley from any competition, trying to save all of these corporate monopolies in Silicon Valley who fund politicians from both the Republican and Democratic parties in the Biden administration and the Trump administration. If it wasn't already obvious enough that the US government has been waging a new Cold War against China, well, the US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said it again. She said in 2023 that China is, quote, the biggest threat we've ever had, end quote. And then she said that, quote, every minute of every day, we have to wake up tightening those controls, end quote. So the US government has been waging a full-on tech war, an economic war, trying to destroy China's tech sector and save Silicon Valley monopolies. And what has been the result? The US has failed. Deepseek has shown how China continues to innovate. It's creating better technology for much cheaper, and it doesn't need access to the cutting-edge chips made by NVIDIA. It's doing it for just a few $1 million with older chips. And the biggest irony in all of this is that for years, Western so-called experts have claimed that China can't innovate. If you don't believe me, this is what the Harvard Business Review, a journal at the most prestigious elite US university, They published an article in 2014 titled, quote, "Why China Can't Innovate," end quote. That's the title. And then the Western media outlet The Diplomat published an article with the same title, "Why China Can't Innovate." And they claimed, quote, "China's system is not set up to encourage innovation in practice," end quote. This is the condescending, frankly racist idea that Western so-called experts have repeated ad nauseum for decades, claiming that China can't innovate, all it can do is copy and steal, because at the heart of their claim, they're saying that the US system is better, capitalism is better, China is supposedly backward, according to them, because China is socialist. It is governed by a communist party, and they could never possibly innovate. Only billionaire capitalist oligarchs like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, who are given billions of dollars of subsidies by the US government, by the way, but let's not talk about that. The free market, only billionaire oligarchs like them can innovate. We're supposed to believe that China and its unique socialist system is unable to innovate. And yet what we're actually seeing is that not only is China innovating even better than US big tech monopolies run by these billionaire oligarchs who fund US politicians and control US politics, in reality, Chinese companies are doing it with much fewer resources. And then what did Deepseek do? It released its model, the R1 AI model, to the entire world for free. Open source. It's now public domain. This is a public good. This is what truly infuriates the capitalist oligarchs in the West, because they want to maintain monopolistic control over all of this technology so they can force people around the world to pay monopoly rents to US corporations like OpenAI, which is charging $200 a month to use ChatGPT Pro. They're furious about this open source technology that China has produced. And this is just the beginning, because there are so many other examples of incredible innovation happening in China. For instance, the same week that Deepseek announced its model, Alibaba, the Chinese company, announced another AI model, which is called Qwen, Qwen, and their model, they claim, is just as good, if not better, than Deepseek's model. So the US government thought that they could destroy China's tech sector by waging tech war and economic war on China, by blocking the export of advanced semiconductors to China. And what has happened? It has only further incentivized China to innovate. And what we've seen is that back in 2015, the Chinese government announced an ambitious industrial policy program called Made in China 2025. And what happened? The Trump administration, the first time, and the Biden administration imposed sanctions and tariffs and restrictions on China, and it didn't work. China met almost all of the goals of its Made in China 2025 program. And it's not just the Chinese press saying this. Bloomberg, the leading US financial media outlet, published an article titled, "Almost 10 years later, China's Made in 2025 has succeeded." Bloomberg published a graphic that illustrates just how much progress China has made technologically in a very short period of time. China is now the world's leader in unmanned aerial vehicles, that's drones, in solar panels, in graphene, in high-speed rail, in electric vehicles, in lithium batteries. China has also become the world leader in LNG carriers, and it's extremely competitive in pharmaceutical drugs, in large tractors, machine tools, robots, artificial intelligence, semiconductors. The only area where China is not yet competitive is commercial aircraft, which is dominated by a duopoly of Airbus and Boeing. And we can see that Boeing has been destroyed by a bunch of finance bros who fired all of the engineers and are selling, they're destroying the company. They're treating it like private equity funds have treated the US economy, selling it for parts. Well, very soon, China is expected to become very competitive in commercial aircraft globally as well. So in every major technological industry, from low tech to high tech, China is catching up very quickly to the United States. And in some cases, as we see with Deepseek, China is surpassing the US. And if you don't believe me, well, I'm going to conclude the analysis today with a video clip from the Chinese New Year celebration that was held. And there was a dance that featured dancing robots. I'm not joking. It is an incredible video showing these robots dancing along with human dancers in a coordinated routine. And unlike Tesla, which does its superficial PR stunts for gullible investors, these robots are not being remote controlled by people behind stage. This is how much incredible progress China has been making in technological development. And like I said, this is just the beginning. Wait to see what China will be doing in the next 10 or 20 years. And this is precisely why politicians in Washington have been losing their minds over China from both parties, Republicans and Democrats, the Trump administration and the Biden administration. They're mouth-foaming warmongers trying to destroy China at all costs because for years, these so-called experts have been telling them China can't innovate. China can't innovate. China can only copy. And here, China is innovating. It's running laps around the United States with fewer resources, under sanctions, under export restrictions, under tariffs. And the US government is getting more and more aggressive because it's trying to protect its Silicon Valley corporate monopolies who do not want any competition. And in reality, what happens is when you have monopolies, they do not want to innovate. They simply want to establish control over everything and then charge exorbitant monopoly rents to get rich. That's become the US economic model. It's not based on innovation. That's why they're trying to ban TikTok. That's why they're trying to ban Chinese electric vehicles. That's why they're trying to ban Chinese solar panels. And now they're going to start banning Chinese AI tools made by companies like Deepseek. So this is absolutely historic. This is earth-shattering. And I think it is very appropriate to refer to it as a new Sputnik moment because the US empire is so arrogant. And it's run by these warmongering politicians who always underestimate their geopolitical rivals. And here we are today, and they have a lot of egg on their face. They have been shown to be the emperor without clothes. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I will see you all next time.